Putin's war is falling apart, his deadlines failed, his army collapsing, his own soldiers trapped. Kupyansk and Pokrovsk still stand, and the second strongest army is breaking under its own weight. Now Putin sends a year-round draft, turning Russia into a conveyor of cannon fodder, and for those who refuse. There is no way out. Welcome to Ukraine Today. I'm Zorislava Kolesnikova. Stay with us. We expose how Putin's war machine is devouring its own people. Putin's deadline fails, Kupyansk and Pokrovsk still stand. The Kremlin's top generals promised victory, but Ukraine crushed their plans. Putin demanded to capture Kupyansk and Pokrovsk by mid-October. Now it's November, and his army is stuck in the mud, bleeding men and machines. Ukraine holds the line, Russia loses time, and patience in the Kremlin is wearing thin.
The generals of the Russian Federation promised Kremlin leader Putin to capture Kupyansk and Pokrovsk, but they were unable to carry out the order.
Putin gave the order to capture them completely by mid-October, actually by November. By the way, the deadline was originally October 15th, but they failed to meet it. Now, the next order is to capture Pokrovsk, Myrnohrad and Kostiantynivka by mid-November. Otherwise, apparently, heads and epaulets will roll. At the very least, that means the Chief of the General Staff and the Air Force General.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has announced a complete clearing of Kupyansk and the Kharkiv region from the occupiers. Before,
there are up to 60 Russians left in Kupyansk. The clearing operation is underway. We will clear everything out. We know. Basically, the dates have been set. They were at the headquarters. We won't be sharing this kind of information for now.
The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation urgently prepared a response. Supposedly, the Russians are advancing in the city.
The head of the Kiev regime has completely lost touch with reality and, listening to Syrskyi's false reports, is absolutely unaware of the operational situation on the ground. Or on the contrary, he understands the hopelessness of the situation and the real position of the Ukrainian armed forces in Kupyansk. A few
days before this, Putin once again reported on successes near Kupyansk. The chief of the Russian General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, falsely reported to the Kremlin dictator that Russian troops had completed the encirclement of Ukrainian forces.
Your comrades, your fellow soldiers, the troops on all fronts are steadily advancing forward.
However, Ukrainian forces held their positions, despite the enemy shelling the crossings and attempting to break through the defenses.
The desire to seize as much territory in Donbass as possible is meant to show that they are carrying out the special military operation and fulfilling their function.
Ukrainian units have already managed to regain control over part of the built-up area in the city. A military operation by Ukrainian forces is underway, aiming to cut off the enemy's supply routes and clear the city. Several units are taking part in it.
We destroy them, but their numbers do not decrease. That is, they keep bringing in more. Another sabotage group comes through. These saboteurs generally tend to avoid direct clashes or confrontations with our servicemen, at least in part because they simply do not have enough weapons, equipment, or ammunition with them. Their approach is to remain hidden and avoid open conflict whenever possible.
Ukrainian units have already managed to regain control over part of the built-up area in the city. A military operation by Ukrainian forces is underway, aiming to cut off the enemy's supply routes and clear the city. Several units are taking part in it. In September, Russian occupiers managed to break into Kupyansk through a pipeline. Against this backdrop, the situation around the city has escalated. Now, however, the occupiers are trying to enter the city disguised as civilians. When Ukrainian forces manage to completely cut off the supply routes and finish clearing Kupyansk, it will complicate the logistics of Russian units in this sector and may reduce their operational mobility. It took the Russian Federation Army 21 months to advance just 39 kilometers from Avdiivka to Pokrovsk. Ukrainian forces continue their defensive efforts in the Pokrovsk direction.
The soldiers often have to walk to their positions because traveling by car has become too dangerous.
Russian troops continue their active offensive towards Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region.
The Russians are trying to act covertly, approaching our positions through tree lines. We managed to detect the enemy and destroy them. In
Pokrovsk itself, it is difficult to conduct combat operations using vehicles since the city is filled with anti-tank hedgehogs and concrete triangles. For the most part, the enemy infantry uses motorcycles and buggies. The ability
to infiltrate further. In Kupyansk, they practically have none. Certain measures have been taken there to prevent this from happening. And their numbers are not increasing, but gradually decreasing. Our groups have been deployed there. These are not necessarily the main intelligence directorate or the security service.
According to media reports, the Russians have concentrated a 170,000-strong army on this section of the front.
They are clearing out those sabotage groups that managed to infiltrate into the city between our firing positions. We need to understand that the front line is just a line on the map, but in the field, on the ground, it's firing positions. And there is a certain distance between them, which saboteurs can slip through.
What complicates the defense of the city is that the occupiers from the Russian Federation entered Pokrovsk in civilian clothes, just as they did in Kupyansk. The Russians gathered in the city disguised as civilians and then began combat operations.
The groups used by the Russians consist of 2 or 3 people. At night or by using the terrain, they can sneak through.
The defense forces were able to replenish their supplies, reinforce their units, and stop the enemy's attempts to cut off the Pokrovsk-Mirnorod highway.
The air assault forces, Marines, and mechanized brigades are currently the main barrier for the Russians in the Pokrovsk direction, but everyone is doing a great job.
In recent days, the armed forces of the Russian Federation have had no successes in Pokrovsk. There are a total of 260 to 300 Russian servicemen in the city.
About 30% of all combat operations on the front are taking place in Pokrovsk. At the same time, 50% of Russia's use of Kabys is directed at Pokrovsk. There are currently 260 people in the city, 300 Russians.
The situation in the Kupyansk and Pokrovsk directions remains dynamic. The fighting continues. The Russian army is suffering simply enormous losses in the Pokrovsk direction. Hundreds have been killed in just this area in a single day. Reports and local publications show a large number of dead occupiers in the built-up areas and tree lines.
Russia is the largest country in the world, located in both Eastern Europe and Northern Asia. It covers a vast area with a wide range of landscapes, including forests, mountains, and tundra. Russia is known for its rich history, diverse culture, and important role in international affairs.
Has allocated an astonishing amount of manpower and resources to capture this city.
Are accumulating. To hold their ground, they need something to fight with. But what do they have to fight with? If last year they had maybe 10, maybe 20 Rashpalkas, well, 30 at most, and that's it. And that's only enough for a few hours of battle. They've blocked the possibility of entering Kupin. For such groups, the control has been tightened, so to speak. And those who remain, well, they're basically doomed where they are. If they want to save their lives, it would be better for them to surrender, because otherwise they will be destroyed.
Despite enormous losses, Russian commanders continue to launch wave after wave of assaults, disregarding the lives of their own soldiers, just to please Putin and present any kind of advance as a victory.
Putin turns Russia into a conveyor of death, year-round conscription signed into law, no breaks, no mercy, endless mobilization to feed the front lines. The Kremlin calls it stability, but behind the speeches lies desperation. Russia's losses are mounting, and Putin is forcing his own people into a war with no end in sight. Stay tuned, we'll show you how the Kremlin's war machine is eating itself alive.
A conveyor belt of cannon fodder. Putin has signed a law on year-round conscription into the Russian army.
We feel confident and stable in our current situation, and despite certain inevitable losses, which of course will occur due to a variety of different circumstances, we remain steady and composed.
The new law allows military enlistment officers to operate without interruption, and dodging service will become even harder.
Well done.
Victory will be ours. Absolutely. Victory will be ours.
But this optimistic attitude will soon leave these heroes.
Never go to the special military operation. You'll end up in hell. The number of people we've lost is just insane.
You'll lose even more because Putin is doing everything to make that happen. According to the new procedure, recruitment into the army will take place throughout the entire year, from January 1st to December 31st, not just during the spring and autumn drafts.
All of this is evidence that the Russian Federation, A, acknowledges the catastrophic scale of personnel losses, and B, is failing to accomplish the tactical level objectives of the so-called special military operation.
According to the new rules, draft notices can now be posted in the state electronic registry. and the deadline to report to the military enlistment office must not exceed 30 days from the date the notice is published.
A roundup is already underway across the territory of the Russian Federation. First and foremost, it has affected citizens from the Central Asian republics. In addition, it should be noted that this decree will lead to an increase in the number of Russians who will leave the territory of the occupying country. Let me remind you that as a result of the so-called first wave of partial mobilization, more than 1.5 million citizens left the territory of the Russian Federation, according to estimates from the Russian side itself.
At the same time, Putin signed another law that allows reservists to be involved in guarding critically important infrastructure facilities. Russian media note that this is about strengthening control over military and energy structures.
Apparently, this is precisely about the covert nature of the mobilization. That is, under the guise of involving reservists, those citizens of the Russian Federation who are part of the so-called combat reserve, who have signed the relevant documents with the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. Apparently, they will be sent directly to the front line of combat. In other words, strategic sites will be protected right at the zero line.
Simply put, Putin's new rules effectively legalize year-round raids and constant pressure on conscripts. And while the Kremlin dictator makes decisions from his cozy office and tells stories about how Russians are supposedly lining up voluntarily to go fight,
Here, our guys are going voluntarily, they come on their own. Every month we have 50,000-60,000 guys coming on their own.
at the front, Russian soldiers cursed the day they joined. Some were lured by money but ended up with nothing. Others were simply deceived and thrown in as cannon fodder.
My head was set straight very quickly. It took me literally 3 or 4 months to fully understand the reality of the situation. I'd rather get locked up, go to prison or whatever else, but I'm not going back there.
Since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the aggressor country Russia has lost about 1.5 million soldiers.
Since the beginning of 2025, 336,000 citizens of the Russian Federation have signed contracts with the armed forces of the Russian Federation. And now attention. According to British intelligence estimates, Russian occupier losses from January to November amounted to 353,000 servicemen. In other words, the losses of the Russian army are much higher than its ability to replenish its personnel. That is, solving the issue of replenishing personnel through volunteers, even with financial incentives, and most of these volunteers are residents of Russia's depressed regions, does not actually solve the problem of replenishing the ranks.
No matter how many soldiers the Kremlin sends to Ukraine, only defeat and death await them here. And the Russian ruler understands this perfectly well. But frankly, he doesn't care.
No way out, Russia's army turns into a prison of its own soldiers. The wounded are sent back into assaults. The unwanted simply disappear. In Putin's army, there is no such thing as refusal. Don't want to sign a contract? You will sign it anyway, even without knowing it. Now even single fathers and injured soldiers are being forced to fight, trapped in a system that screws them up and splits them out. How far will the Kremlin go to keep its collapsing army alive?
The wounded and maimed are sent into assaults, and those deemed undesirable among the military are simply eliminated. And if someone doesn't want to sign a contract, they'll end up signing it anyway. But the newly minted soldier only finds out about this after the fact. It's also nearly impossible to resign from the army. Even single fathers, who by law should be released without issue, are denied discharge. During this time, their children are simply placed in orphanages.
According to the single fathers interviewed by Verstka, commanders may initially just refuse to accept the resignation report, denying discharge verbally. If the documents are accepted, they might get lost, but the servicemen continue to serve while their children temporarily stay with relatives or are placed in orphanages.
So it turns out that with a living parent, the children are orphans. But really, what can you say about discharging a healthy man when even severely wounded soldiers aren't written off in the Russian army?
They looked at us and said, "What's with the healthy guy with no leg?" "Oh, that's a leg. A leg. Even though the call sign is Sky, it's a leg. He's been sitting here for days too, doing fuck all." What was I trying to say with that? They came in, looked around, asked who we were, why we were here, and were told the reasons. "All right, guys, got it." And then they left.
These occupiers will soon be sent on their final meat assault. The fact that some of them are missing limbs doesn't concern anyone. Their commanders just use them as disposable cannon fodder. Some occupiers still believe the state will help them, so they complain to the Kremlin ombudsman about being denied medical care or receiving poor treatment. The number of such complaints has quadrupled in 2 years, from 459 to 1,976.
The applicant's husband, after receiving treatment at a frontline hospital, was sent to a military medical commission to determine his fitness for military service. Upon arriving at his military unit to receive the order for the medical commission, he was sent to the front line. Since May 2024, he has been listed as missing in action. After injuries or due to pre-existing health issues, not all soldiers are given enough time for full and proper rehabilitation. Sometimes a soldier is sent back to the front despite doctors' recommendations to continue treatment and the need for rehabilitation. As a result, a serviceman who is physically unable to perform combat duties ends up on the front line.
But at least these ones went to the front on their own. And there are cases when Russian men only find out after the fact that their occupation has been changed.
Black recruiting, yes, black recruiters. They've turned into slave traders. We basically have slave trading going on, supplying people to the front.
Everyone, without exception, ends up getting caught in this. Cerebral palsy, mental illnesses, missing limbs, all of that is nothing and will be put to use in the Russian army. The local administrations, of course, know all about it and even encourage and assist.
In my home village of Cherkasy, they got a guy from Siberia drunk, married him off to an elderly woman of loose morals and low social responsibility. Then they sent him to the front. He died there. And now they're claiming the compensation as his wife, even though he never even saw her in his life.
His commanders can help with the elimination of such a Russian soldier. The occupiers complain that unwanted SVO soldiers are often sent on suicide assaults. One of these roles during an assault is called a beacon by the soldiers. The occupier is sent without a weapon or body armor to expose the firing positions of Ukrainian troops.
You just run in one direction with no way back. There's a blocking detachment behind you. They don't let you go back. Your only chance to survive is to get wounded and be taken prisoner like...
The occupiers admit not only to commanders eliminating their own kind, but also to the killing of civilians. A Russian soldier recounted how his commander entered the wrong coordinates, which resulted in an artillery strike on a village. Many people were killed, including children. The soldier only found out about what happened after the administration of the so-called LNR complained to the command.
Basically, they mixed up the Grad and Uragan targets. They were called the same by grid squares. And the idiot who was on duty at the council, he just basically mixed them up. The captain was in charge. Why should I care? They just give me the numbers to call the battalion commander. So he says, how are the stats? Fine. He says, do you know 12 kids? He says, screwed 9 women.
Of course, the incident was covered up, and on Russian television, they reported that supposedly Ukrainian servicemen were in that village. And this is just one of the stories that have come to light in the last few days. In reality, the situation is much worse, and with each passing day, it keeps getting worse.
That's all for today on Ukraine Today. If you believe the truth must be louder than Kremlin's lies, like, share and subscribe. Your support helps us stay on the information frontline, expose Putin's war machine and defend Ukrainians' voice across the world. Stay strong, stay informed and stay with Ukraine.